Hi, and welcome to NSU's Tutoring and Testing Center workshops. My name is Marie Gamio, and I am the Graduate Assistant for Razor's Edge Strategies and Supplemental Instruction. Today, I'll be leading the workshop on personal productivity hacks. Small disclaimer, something to keep in mind, this is not an all-encompassing presentation. These are just small things to keep in mind and tips that you can use to better plan for yourself and improve aspects of your productivity. So keeping that in mind. Before we start, a quick agenda. We're going to go over what I consider the fundamentals of productivity. So that would be knowing yourself and planning for yourself, the importance of developing a routine and things to keep in mind when doing so, setting goals, specifically SMART goals, and how to avoid procrastination. We'll also cover why we procrastinate and what you can do to avoid it. So small things. So something to remember. Self-knowledge is the beginning of self-improvement. It seems so simple a concept, but if you know that you are a night owl, then it doesn't make sense for you to plan study time at 8 a.m. in the morning. And you have to adjust your schedule to fit your needs. So this is why the first thing to consider is knowing who you are as a person, what your preferences are, when you work best, what type of learner you are, whether you're visual, whether you're auditory, whether you're a kinesthetic learner, things like that. And it's not, one size fits all. It does require kind of like trial and error, but once you figure that out, it makes it so much easier to plan for yourself. So I would consider that one of the hardest things to do, but also one of the most important things to do in order to have an efficient and effective schedule, or kind of like process, an effective and efficient process for anything that you do. We also cover how to develop a routine. So these are just basic things, like you have to use a planner to keep track of your schedule. When I first started, everything seems very overwhelming. So if this is new to you, then you start small. You start with one particular class, or you start with just your school schedule. I know students that have separate schedules or separate planners for their schoolwork, for their clubs, for their work, for personal things, so on and so forth. Determine what works best for you, whether you like to have everything together or whether you like to have that separation, and then try and build those habits. You also have to determine what method helps you best. If you're someone that's very visual, then grab planners or develop some kind of visual that helps you. Remember, there's a number of amazing apps and websites that can help produce those visuals for you. If you're an auditory learner and you need those reminders, I have another student who leaves messages for themselves to remember, and they put reminders for themselves so that they know that they have to study next week for biology, and so on and so forth. And if you prefer just writing things down, making to-do lists, like clear cut, straight to the point, then that's also really good too. Again, everything is about what works best for you and what's going to help you be the most productive that you can be. So things to consider when you're developing a routine. It's just really 3 things, but it's really hard when you're first starting out to continuously do this. So the first thing is obviously you have to develop milestones. Small goals are key to your success because you start small, and as you go through those goals, you start creating longer term ones to kind of have a plan of what you're going to do. But the small goals, the ones that are short term, are really good for motivation and for keeping track of your progress. Step 2 of that would be to review your plans often. You have to check your progress to make sure that you're on track. And if you're not on track, then you would have to adjust and redirect yourself in a different way. And then that brings me to the third aspect of developing a routine. You have to self-evaluate constantly. Your ability to adapt will be the key to your success. You have to be honest with yourself and say, okay, this isn't working. What can I do different? What can I change? And so by keeping these three things in mind, it helps you to successfully evaluate, analyze, and adjust your habits and create better ones for yourself as a person. Another thing would be to set SMART goals. So SMART goals are goals that are specific, that they're measurable, they're attainable, relevant, and it's based on a time limit. So when we talk about specific goals, you have to make sure that those goals include details so that you know what success looks like. So saying, something like, I'm going to study chapter 2 is pretty vague. It's not quite as specific as possible. If you instead say, oh, I'm going to study, positive and negative reinforcement, because I don't understand that. That's very specific. In order to make sure that that goal is something that you can complete, you also have to be able to measure it. So let's say you are studying positive and negative reinforcement, and things related to that. You can take a practice quiz, or you can say, oh, for the next quiz, I'm going to try and score an 82. And then once you score that 82, or if you surpass it, or if you don't meet it, you'll know whether your studying is effective for you or for that subject. It also has to be attainable. So you can't say, oh, I'm going to study all of chapter 1 through 4 for my test in 2 days in the next 2 days. It's incredibly unrealistic, and it doesn't budget for setbacks. In order to make sure that you are getting the most out of your productivity, the most out of your studying, you have to make sure that you are studying with enough time in advance so that if something does happen, you are not pressed for time at the very end, and you have enough time to read and process the information that you are trying to learn. SMART goals also have to be relevant. So if you have a test on chapter 5, then it doesn't make sense to read and study chapters 1 through 4 unless it builds upon. More often than not, in most of these college courses, however, they ask questions that are specifically relevant to whatever chapter is being covered on the test. So if it says study for chapter 5, then you're studying for chapter 5. Everything else would have to be more of a long-term goal in order to review for whatever cumulative tests you have at the end of the semester. So you have to make sure that whatever efforts you are undergoing are going to help you attain whatever goal you've set for yourself. And you also have to make sure that it has a time limit. You have to give a deadline for how it is that you're going to measure your success. So it doesn't make any sense to say, I'll cover, the 57 pages of chapter 2 in the next 3 or 4 days. Could be possible, but is it realistic? Is it giving yourself enough time to really understand, digest, analyze, evaluate the information that you are reading and processing so that you'll be able to remember it and successfully apply it when it comes time for your test? So those are some things to consider. Even saying something like, oh, I'll cover 3 or 4 pages every day for the next week and a half might be something that's a bit more realistic and it still has a time limit attached to it. When we're talking about time management, I like to use something called Covey's, I think I'm saying that right, Covey's quadrant. So basically it's a time management matrix that helps you split your tasks into 4. Whenever you're looking at a task or whenever you're looking at anything, you should split it up into whether it's important and not as important, and whether it's extremely urgent or something that is still a ways off. So something that can be important and urgent is the paper that you have due tomorrow night that you haven't started. That's important and that's urgent. And then something that might not be as urgent but is still important would be a test that you have to study for in 2 weeks. So that's something that takes a lot of time and preparation, and you have to make sure that you're on top of, so that it doesn't end up being a number 1 category of urgent and important like the paper was. 3 and 4 are things like different study habits that you might want to implement into your routine. And 4 is things like, browsing videos on TikTok, which I'm guilty of. But yeah, pretty much browsing videos on TikTok. It's a great de-stressor, but it shouldn't take up the majority of your time. So when I first started out, I was introduced to this quadrant and it changed my life. I still use it to this day now when it comes to prioritizing assignments in grad school and even for work. So I definitely recommend it. It's fantastic. I will also say that it looks different for everyone, and that ideally you should be working mostly in quadrant 2 on things that take time and are important, so that they don't end up being number 1 assignments and number 1 in the number 1 quadrant. And then 3 or 4 you work in it occasionally, but the majority of your time should be in quadrant 2. We've reached procrastination. So in the next section, I'll cover why we procrastinate and how we can fight against it. So 3 of the most common things that I've noticed in myself and in peers and in my students are that we procrastinate for one of 3 things. So 1, there's no hard deadline. So we don't actually know when it's due, or it's a really long-term project that we keep pushing off because it doesn't feel urgent. So in those cases, if you're unsure of a deadline for something, it's best to ask and clarify so you can better plan your schedule and allow for the completion of the task. The next thing would be insufficient resources. So sometimes you don't have the necessary resource or knowledge to complete that task quickly or correctly or efficiently. So we push it off because it feels much more work than we are willing to give to it in that precise moment. Ways to combat this is to work in that number 2 quadrant of the Covey's time management quadrants, and look for resources and information that will help you complete it so that it doesn't feel as big and monumental of a situation. And then finally, it feels overwhelming. So some tasks feel so big and appear to be so time consuming that it can feel incredibly overwhelming to start. So it's really important to develop a system that helps you break down those big tasks into smaller, easily managed sections. And then finally, this is a little bit of a call out. Something to consider is that oftentimes people procrastinate as well because of fear of failure, and I think that's really important. So I think it's important to recognize that Fear of failure is a big thing, and it's a real thing, and you need to find ways to combat that fear of failure. You know, it will very often, students will, myself included, will procrastinate on an assignment because we would rather think that it's because we didn't dedicate enough time to the assignment, as opposed to not being able or not having the knowledge, not being quote unquote smart enough to successfully complete it. So, food for thought, keep that in mind. All it really is just planning and making sure that you have a system that works for you. So we talked about why we do it. Now, here are ways to kind of fight against that. So, number one, the one that I definitely try and use more often is to find purpose in what you're doing. I am very much a type of person that if I don't believe in what I'm doing, then I find it difficult to dedicate the time and energy and emotion that it requires, especially if I have other tasks that feel more pressing or feel more urgent. And it's not to say that whatever task I'm neglecting isn't important, it just tends to go by the wayside. So if you find purpose in what you're doing, then it'll make it much easier for you to prioritize time to complete the assignment or complete whatever it is that you're trying to do, so that it doesn't end up in that first quadrant. Two, chop up your tasks so they're easier to do. This is great for essays or for studying for big tests. You know, if you start out far enough, typically 2 weeks, for an essay, for example, you can develop an outline and you can then write key points and look for, like, do your citations, and then the last step would be to write it out. You already have your citations done, so you don't have to stop the flow of your writing, and at the end you would just have to clean it up. Same thing with studying. If it tells you you have to cover chapter 2 and 3, then you look at the themes and the topics in each of those chapters, and you dedicate a day or two, depending on how big the topic is, to make sure that you are understanding that information and that you're not overwhelming yourself. 3, always ask for clarification. That's one of the biggest ones. You have to know when things are due. It just makes it so much easier to plan and to make sure that you are on top of your things. Number 4 is take breaks. It's so important. You know, like, we are humans, we are not machines, and we have capacities. You know, and I guess the really great thing about machines is that you can, if they break down, they break down. And they can't work anymore. With humans, we typically tend to work past our breaking point, and it's important to recognize for yourself what your breaking point is, and to step back and take that break, recharge, and then come back to it when you have the capacity to do so. Number 5 kind of goes hand in hand with number 4, which is you have to find ways of rewarding yourself. You know, like, school is hard, you know, and especially when you're juggling a couple of high intensity classes, and you have work, and you have clubs, and you have other responsibilities. It's difficult to find the energy and the time to devote to, you know, studying a topic that you don't find purpose for, or that you consider busy work. So if you are someone that works with a reward system, then find ways of doing that so that you feel motivated to study and to kind of, you know, trudge through it. And then number 6 is to create a good environment to motivate yourself. This is incredibly important, especially in our current situation right now with COVID and online learning. It's so important to have a space that makes you feel good about learning and makes you feel good about school, you know, and that allows you to concentrate. So I definitely recommend against doing your schooling in bed. Please do it at a desk, go out, you know, go to a library, go to a study room, go to a coffee shop, outside, inside, however you'd like, but carve a space for yourself to really focus and work on your schooling that isn't your room, because it can muddle the boundaries between personal and school, and it will make it really difficult for you to feel motivated and energized to do either of those things. So just things to keep in mind. And then something else to remember, I have a lovely colleague and dear friend, Ray Basqua. She always says to give yourself grace. School is hard enough as it is without a global pandemic, and even more so now with a global pandemic and distance learning. So it's important to be kind to yourself, and it's important to recognize your limits and to recharge, re-energize, and continue to tackle whatever situation you're in. So give yourself grace. We've talked about all that. So let's look at some resources. So the Tutoring and Testing Center here at NSU has 3 amazing things that I recommend for everyone. The first and foremost being scheduling an appointment with your academic success coach. We have, I think, 8 undergrad and 2 graduate. They're all wonderful. They're all amazing. They're all incredibly knowledgeable in time management and setting SMART goals, in different study techniques that you can apply depending on whatever class it is that you're taking. So I highly, highly, highly recommend scheduling an appointment with an academic success coach in order to get started, especially if this is something that's completely new to you. I also recommend tutoring services, especially for difficult and hard to cover material. Just make sure that you have your notes and that you've done the work previously so that they can help you as best as they can in each of those appointments. And then finally, select courses here at NSU have SI leaders. SI leaders are a wonderful resource, and I highly, again, recommend going to their sessions. They create amazing worksheets, and they have super engaging activities that help you kind of disseminate the information and apply it in a variety of different ways that might help bridge some of those connections. And then you can talk to them and fellow students to kind of be like, hey, I didn't understand anything about what we covered last week. Can you help me out? And they will, It's very much based to your class and your professor. So please utilize these resources as best as you can, as much as you can, to help, your productivity and your success. And then finally, some apps that I typically recommend. I have an Android, so I don't know if these are available for iPhones, but hopefully they are. I'll go through them really quickly. So the first one is To-Do List. It's as simple as it sounds. It's literally a to-do list for people that need, quick, straight to the point, what do I have to do? You also have Planner Pro and Time Planner. These are kind of more involved. They are visual, they are color coded, they have graphics, really great things for visual learners. And then we also have Forest and Study Bunny. Both of these apps are studying apps that for example, in Forest, you grow a plant, and then if you interrupt it, if you use your phone, the plant dies. So it kind of forces you to be like, I don't want my plants to die, so I won't use my phone. And it's really great because it also gives you statistics on how long you studied for, all the times that you lit up the screen to check your phone, and so on and so forth. And it kind of helps you better track your progress, so that you can, again, adjust and adapt to what works best for you. Study Buddy does something very similar to Forest. It's just a different concept. It's with the bunny. And then Avocation is really great, especially if you're just starting out to time management. It's really simple and a little basic, but it covers all of the necessities and all of the, I guess, aspects that you'd need to kind of like start planning your time and your activities efficiently. And then finally, thank you and good luck with your studying and with your online learning. Please, please, please visit us at NSU Tutoring and Testing Center so that you can learn more about our services and schedule appointments with your academic success coach and your tutors. Thank you and